Okay, well, thank you for coming back here. I'm looking forward to continuing on with you in thinking about the ways we can impact the world. So incredible. You know, earlier I was talking about there in Genesis 11 with the Tower of Babel and what all was happening there, and God was like, wow, look at that synergy. That's amazing. But it's not the kind of amazing I want. And so, you know, he confounded their languages and they spread out. But I know that as a body of Christ, we have so much opportunity to pull together, to work together, to create that synergistic effect that the sum is way more than all of us individually working together. My next talk here is titled Tables in the Wilderness. But I'd like to first talk a little bit about why I'm here. So I have a flyer that I handed out there, and you're the first people to get to see this flyer, and it's even somewhat of a working draft yet. And this flyer is about Extend Cafes. So as most of you know, my wife and I own Sowers Harvest Cafe back in State College, Pennsylvania. We are about 8 years old there, actually a little over 8 years now, and that we started it there. Our vision for starting Sowers was first and foremost to be a kingdom embassy of Jesus there in downtown State College. So we're right next to Penn State campus. We have close to 50,000 different with students there, approximately 80 different countries represented right there at Penn State. So incredible opportunities right here in central Pennsylvania, just 2 hours from here. And so that was our main vision, was to be that kingdom embassy. Another vision that Linnell and I had when we started Sowers was to kind of create a model that could be duplicated in other cities and around other universities. And so my wife and I have always lived in the city. And as we've done that over the last 15 years, our vision continues to grow with how can we as kingdom people, as Anabaptist people, kind of move back into the towns and become townspeople again, much as the early Anabaptist or even as the early church. Has it been good for us to kind of be the people of the country, to kind of be away from the population centers? And so there's something we're grappling with. And so we've always lived in the city, my wife and I, ever since we got married, now over 15 years, headed towards 16 years. So that was one of the other visions that as we started Sowers, like, could this actually be a model that others could duplicate? And so informally, over the last number of years, we have helped other cafes start, like Encounter Cafe out in Iowa. We actually work closely with the Walk Cafe in Zanesville, Ohio. They were actually starting that much at the same time as we were, and we got opened up before them. And so they ended up coming to our cafe, and we just kind of worked together in those first couple of challenging years. More recently, we helped coffee shop out of Potsdam, New York, way northern New York, called Old Market Coffee. They came and sat down with us, and we kind of told them some things we've learned. And one of their main guys, one of their owners, actually came and worked at Sowers for a time. And so we worked closely with them as they started Old Market Coffee, amazing coffee and crepes. If you ever get through Potsdam, New York, please stop by there. And then the most recent cafe that we helped start was Coronation Cafe out of Western Massachusetts. They're now a little over a year running and making incredible impact in the city of Amherst, which is right next to UMass. So again, lots of students, lots of locals, lots of opportunity there. And so as we've been interacting with these cafes, we've done some different networking of different types over the last number of years. But more recently with Old Market and Coronation, we've been dreaming about what would it look like to create a for-profit alliance where cafes can become part of that, where we can exchange resources, where we can grow together and become better businesses together, where we can also help train other people, help take other parties who have a dream, to take it from a concept to success, where they're not only financially profitable, but also making impact in their community in more holistic ministry type ways. And so out of that has come the vision of Extend Cafes. And so as you can see here, our vision is a global network of flourishing cafes harnessing the relational power at the intersection of table and community for the cause of King Jesus. And notice it says global there. So our first cafe that we're actually helping through our training track is in Mexico. And it's a couple that are going there to work with another couple in a small city in Mexico, where they can use business, just use those daily rhythms of life in a cafe, coffee and cuisine to build relationships and make an impact there in their city, and also even a way to support themselves. And so we envision this platform being way beyond just North America businesses, but even including creative access countries like possibly in Southeast Asia, where it's very difficult to be there. You can actually come in as a business and train other people and have a network of cafes in maybe in a city or in a country. And so that's our vision with Extend Cafes. Extend your table, extend the kingdom. And so that's some of my background here as I share this message with you. Tables in the wilderness. My dream as a follower of Christ, as an Anabaptist Christian, is to see us as Anabaptists stepping forward with optimism into the challenges that face us in our day. In many, many ways, we live in a wilderness. I think it's a sense that if you would go out on the street of your town to your local city and say, hey, human, how are we humans doing in our world? There's very few that are going to have an optimistic response. Many will hang their head. Many will get angry. You will hear tons of stories, tons of disappointment, and really just lots of people very depressed with the world that we live in. We live in a wilderness. A wilderness, what is that? It's a wild, uninhabited place. It's very inhospitable to those around it. It's very lonely. In our day today, there's wars happening. We're 2.5 years into the war between Russia and Ukraine, and we're maybe 5 weeks into the war in the Middle East with Israel and Hamas. Many wars, even that aren't even being reported, that are happening around the world, and also rumors of wars, many other dynamics. Globalism at large is a pipe dream. It's breaking down. Countries are aligning themselves with each other against other large countries, and we live in a time that's quite scary. There's broken families. There's unreached people groups who don't want to be reached, where there's governments who are standing in the way, preventing Christ followers to go there. There's addictions. There's an epidemic of loneliness in our country as well, and around the world, as much of the world has navigated now to using technology. I don't care if you're in the backwoods, in the back jungles of Colombia, they have smartphones there. Now using Elon Musk's Starlink that has just made its ways into the jungles. People are getting online, but they're realizing there's a sense too that our needs for connection, our needs for relationship are not being met through this new technology. And around us, there's people who have a whole different understanding of what it means for humans to flourish. The secular vision for human flourishing runs absolutely counter to our vision of what it looks like for humans to flourish in Christ and according to his word. And they seem to be ruling the day. Gavin Ortlund, he runs a ministry called Truth Unites. He's ministered in a city as a pastor, but more recently, as he's seen so many Christians quit going to church, or people falling away from the faith, he's really began to focus more on reaching people through online platforms. And he says this: about 40 million people have stopped going to church. The percentage of people who don't have any religious affiliation has spiked up 30%. 30 years ago, it was only 5% here in the United States. It's just this massive sea change. especially in the younger generation, so many young people are leaving the faith, end of quote. Just last week, I sat with a young man. He's an American. He grew up in a kind of a quasi-Catholic home where parents were pretty much on the way out of the Catholic Church. And his understanding of Scripture, he's an undergrad, he's in his last year of college, doing exceedingly well in his study of economics. In many ways, he's got the world by the tail. But he's somebody who didn't know words like the Trinity, or even almost nothing about the Bible, even though his family, his parents, even his aunts, some of his aunts are pretty religious Catholics, no knowledge of Scripture, an American student. And so as Christians, how do we respond to things like this? What should be our posture as we look at the world around us and realize in many ways, as followers of Christ, we are in a desert and we're moving into even more of a time when there'll be a lot more chaos and a lot more uncertainty. I'm very confident of that. I do believe deeply, friends, that God is on the move. That God has a vision for new things. That God desires that your family, your church, that me and my family and my church, that He wants us to bring heaven to earth in our communities. He doesn't want to see us backing away and becoming defensive and putting up walls. Rather, He wants to see us moving forward with that positive mentality that says, how can I reach the people around me? Problems become opportunities. But so many times we're like Thomas. We said, only if we can see it will we believe it. When God sees an army, sees a battalion of people fit and ready for the fight, we see mangled, broken lives. When God sees a haven for birds and cattle and humans, when He sees a garden in the wilderness, we just see a hole in the ground. Isaiah captures a vision of God in so many ways in that amazing book. But I want to draw your attention to Isaiah 43, verse 19. For I am about to do something new. See, I have already begun. Do you not see it? I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I will create rivers in the dry wasteland. God sees, He sees, yes, He can see the desert, but He also can see the river. He can see His body that's equipped to reach those needs, to bring that water of life. But so many times we are fearful and we draw back. Let's pray. Father, I thank You for this opportunity here this morning, that we can be gathered here together, that we can think about what is Your will for us. How do You want us to respond to the challenges of our day? Do You want us to become defensive, to draw back, to build bigger walls, to make our lanes longer and our properties stronger? Or do You want us to step forward as we see Christ doing, even in such a vulnerable position as coming as a baby, and then as King of the world, but yet not having armed forces around Him, not having people guarding Him, but going and teaching the good news of the kingdom, and finally even being willing to die that horrendous death on the cross. Father, You're asking us to, in that way, embrace the upside-down kingdom, to move forward, knowing that You are going ahead of us, that You're preparing the way, and that You will protect us in Your way, that we will be with You in eternity, that we're part of Your church and that You're working with us. Father, I pray, Lord, that a special blessing here on this message as we think about tables in the wilderness. I pray a blessing on these dear young people that are here, that are considering how You might want to use them for their lives. Father, I pray, Father, that You could use this message in some way here to equip Your church. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. C.S. Lewis says this. He said, human life has always been lived on the edge of a precipice. Human culture has always existed under the shadow of something infinitely more important than itself. If men had postponed the search for knowledge and beauty until they were secure, the search would never have begun. So we live in a time when there's many dangerous places in this world. But as we allow Christ to work in us, as we allow his word to equip us, as we join up with other brothers and sisters within our church and in our local communities and even broader in our broader church groups, I believe that we will have that strength to say, yes, we live in a dark time. There is clouds on the horizon, but God is calling us to step forward even to the risk of our lives. And in doing that, that's the way that we can bring knowledge and beauty to the world around us. The late Tim Keller, as he just recently died, but in the past 2 years, he wrote a series of 4 articles kind of talking about some of the challenges that we here in the West are facing. And Tim Keller, if you know him, he's the one who went to Manhattan, I think in the late 80s, to a place that was just a bastion of materialism. It didn't look like there would be one spiritually interested place there. It just looked like he was walking into a den of lions with all the intellectuals and all those who were at Wall Street and people who, in a sense, had the world by the tail. People were like, you going there, you will not be able to plant a church. But he felt called to go, and Tim Keller went. And today he would have pastored a Presbyterian church there called Redeemer Church, I believe. But and I think it was like 40,000 members, so it actually turned into like a mega church, which we can talk about that if we would want, but that's a sideline thing. But God used him in mighty ways there in the city. But as he has been looking at the challenges in our culture here in the West, this is what he had to say just in the last year or two. An article. The Christian church, quote, the Christian church in the West faces the first post-Christian, deeply secular culture in history. We, the Western church, have not yet developed a way to do evangelism with the secular and with the nones, those who classify themselves as non-religious, the nones. That really gains traction and sees many people regularly coming to the faith. The means, and he goes on to talk about kind of his vision for maybe how this could actually happen. What would it look like to see people coming to faith instead of leaving the faith and many people not interested in Christianity? He said the means, the way this happen will entail a mobilization of lay people in evangelism, as in the early church. The platform, the way we'll go about this, will show how to demonstrate to deeply skeptical people that Christianity is respectable, desirable, and believable. And so I believe that the message I'm bringing to you this morning is a message, is a way of life, is a platform that all of us can use. You don't have to be skilled uniquely. You don't have to have a degree in missiology. But every person who's a Christ follower, I believe, will be able to utilize the principles, some of the practices that I want to lay out here as we think of tables in the wilderness. And even if you go to the Middle East or even if you go to Africa, it doesn't matter where you go. The role of tables, of serving tables, the idea of hospitality is something that you can use in any setting. And I believe that as we do this, as we show up and serve in the ways I want to lay out here, that it will demonstrate to deeply skeptical people that Christianity is believable, that it is desirable, and that it is respectable. So, what are those things? And I want I'm going to lay out here 3 E things to do. And I didn't say easy, okay? They're not easy. They're the opposite of easy. It's going to mean taking up your cross and following Christ to the bitter end. It's going to mean giving all. It's the 3 E's, I believe, at the heart of kingdom expansion. So here they are. It's 3 phrases that begin with a letter that begin with E. Number 1 is extend your table. Number 2 is exercise unreasonable hospitality. And then finally, number 3 will be engage in dignifying conversations. Extend your table, exercise unreasonable hospitality, and number 3, engage in dignifying conversations. So let's just go ahead and jump right into number 1 under this idea of extend your table. Let's begin with the table idea. What is a table symbolic of? When you think of a table, what do you think about? Right now, you're sitting at a table, and it's a great place for you to put your books on to study. But it's quite different than, you're sitting at that table quite differently than what you would typically sit at a table. All right, you're all just on one side, and you're not facing each other, you're facing me as the speaker. Okay, so here, tables are so diverse, very utilitarian just for things like this. But typically when we think of a table, we think of a place where we eat together. A table is symbolic of hospitality, of relationships, of family, an extended family, of love, of acceptance, even worship. A table is a place where Christ can be embodied in the world through blessing, breaking, giving, and nourishment. And I would like to suggest to you that even God uses tables. Even God waits on tables. Think of this verse here in Psalms 23, verse 5. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You've anointed my head with oil, my cup runs over. Psalm 23, a beautiful passage on God's provision. And this is the psalmist is saying, you prepare a table. Now, did God prepare an actual table? Not really. But it's language that's symbolic of relationship, of connection, of love, of provision, of serving. And then when we come to Jesus, was Jesus like his Father who served tables? There's a great little story that Jesus gives in one of his teachings. It goes like this. He said, who's greater, the one who sits at the table or the one who serves? And it's kind of like this rhetorical question that Jesus answered himself. He says, it's the one who sits at the table is greater. And then he goes on to say, he said, but I'm the one who among you is serving. And so if you can just think about what is said there, here is God in the flesh with his creation. And he's saying, and he's teaching his disciples, people around him, he's helping them understand that he, God, is not only come among us as one of us, but he is willing to serve us, to dignify humanity in that way of serving. I just love that story. And we just see that again and again, we see that coming out through the life of Jesus as he related. He reclined at many tables. Just look up tables in the New Testament. Many tables Jesus reclined at. The sinners, the Pharisees, he was there. He walked among them. He interacted around lots of tables. And of course, the Last Supper is a table too that's so powerful and rich with meaning. I love the story even of the Emmaus Road. We'll touch on this as we go through here because I believe the Emmaus Road gives us a hospitality map of the way that we can serve those around us. But even at the Emmaus Road, even in his resurrected body, right? He reclined at the table with his two nondescript disciples. He came and walked with them, and he talked with them. And they were like, hey, sit with us, come, have supper with us. We were such a great conversation. He was encouraging them. And he sat with them, and as he broke bread there, then their eyes were open. There was something powerful in that breaking of bread. There was something spiritual about that, and they saw, oh, this is Jesus. So again, we're just reflecting on the term table and the idea of extend your tables. Now I want to think about extend with you for a little bit. How many of you in your house have a table that extends? It's like everybody. If I would ask this question in State College to a group of students, I would say, how many of you have a table that extends? Like nobody would raise their hand almost. Because tables that extend are at the heart of us as Anabaptist people. At the heart, we're so used to, here comes aunt, here come the aunts and the uncles and the extended family, and we stretch that table out. And I remember at our table, where my parents' place, we still have it. My parents bought that table when they were just freshly married, and we're still using it to this day. It's got a lot of scars and it's been used hard, let me tell you. And the stories that have been told around that table. But we can put 30 people around the table. Like it's huge. It goes as long as these tables right here. So these are 3 6-footers, right? 18 feet, actually longer than that. It's huge. I mean, they have a whole big box full of boards that we pull out and put in the table and make it long. At our house, we have a table that extends. Now, it's not nearly that big. But the idea of extend your tables is something that we understand in very practical ways. And I want us to begin to think about in a spiritual way, how can we extend our tables spiritually? Jesus said, Matthew 28, the Great Commission, right? Go ye therefore and make disciples. Right there, right there, Jesus, the word extend, he's not saying it, but it is there. It's expand, extend the kingdom. It means to go where we haven't before. It means to make something a lot longer than it was. Take light into darkness. It means to pull people into a circle that weren't in that circle before. Mother Teresa said, she said, the problem with the world is that we draw our circle of family too small. As we know, Mother Teresa served the poor for years in India, and she just welcomed them in. And so it's this idea of circle expansion. It's this idea of making your table longer, those who you serve. But of course, with that idea comes the idea of sacrifice, of vulnerability. I love the story there in Matthew 25 of the parable of the talents. So Jesus told this great story where you have this master giving one servant 5 talents, other servant 2 talents, other servant 1 talent. And the one who received 5 and the one who received 2, what did they do? They went and invested it, right? They took it and invested it with the vision of making it greater. But the last servant that got 1 talent, what did he do? He took it and buried it in the ground. He had this really fearful mentality that, you know what? My master, he's hard. He's going to come back. He's going to ask me for it. And I'm going to make sure I have it to give it back to him. And so he buried it. And guess what? It was there. He knew where he buried it. When the master came back, he presented that 1 talent. Here you go. Was the master happy about that? No. The master used incredibly hard words. And he took that 1 talent and gave it to the one who now had 10. He said, the one who has will have more. And so I believe Jesus is teaching this idea of multiplication, of expansion, of investment, of extension. And the only way that we're going to extend, the only way, brothers and sisters, we're going to extend the kingdom is by moving into this idea of vulnerability, of going where we never went before, of stepping towards our fear and moving past that by the help of God. Jesus, and it's also, and then even more so, Jesus tells this really sobering story there in Luke 14. I like to tell people there's 3 chapters I like in Luke. Luke 4, Luke 14, and Luke 24. 24 is the Emmaus Road. Luke 4 has some incredible teachings in it. We referenced it earlier today. And then Luke 14, but it's really, really sobering. And he says, when you give a dinner or supper, don't ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, nor your rich neighbors, lest they also invite you back and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. For you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. How many of you have invited somebody into your home that you know would never invite you back? How many of you have you seen that done in your communities? And that can be a really, really sobering question. How many of you are intentionally create time in your schedule to invite those people in? What about, we have Thanksgiving coming up here. Have you thought about, would there be a way I could have people into my home who maybe have never been into a home like a Christian home like ours? Who would that be? Do you have anybody? Have you thought about that before? Maybe instead of a Thanksgiving, it could be a Friendsgiving, right? Mark Gladwell has this great quote. He says this: we learn from Jesus' fellowship meals that our tables should be places of radical welcome, especially for those who are lonely and on the outside. This is the shape of the kingdom of God. So I want to move into just a couple practical areas of maybe ways that I could, because this message is from me too. It's not just directed at you. Like I grapple with these things. I want to grow in these areas of reaching out to those, especially to those who are on the outside. It doesn't come natural for me or for anybody. It's a life of sacrifice. So, practical points. Begin to pray. Do you have a prayer point on your daily prayers? Like, Lord, lead me to someone today that I haven't met, that I can share Christ with. I rarely do that. I have to confess that with you. I rarely do that. But the other Saturday, I was feeling a little bit discouraged with my lack of evangelism, my lack of like reaching out to people and actually sharing verbally of the hope that's within me with meekness and fear. And I prayed, Lord, lead me to somebody today that I could talk to. And it was a Saturday. So Sowers, if you've been to Sowers on Saturdays, terribly busy. It really can be really tough to have time to talk with people. But as I got in my vehicle and walked towards the office door, the cafe had already been going. It was open about half an hour already. I had no more than laid my hand on the door. And a gentleman had just came out. He was just like 30 seconds ahead of me. The door had closed, and he was walking down the sidewalk. And I laid my hand, and all of a sudden this guy's like coming back at me going, "Hey, sir." And I stopped. I said, "Hi." He said, "Tell me, who are these people?" He's like, and do you work here? I don't know if he knew some about body language, you could tell, or whatever. And so we ended up getting into this really, really neat conversation where I was able to share Christ with him. He was agnostic. He was just traveling through and happened to look up place to get breakfast and brought him to Sowers. Was it all coincident? No. I had prayed that morning, and it was one of the most fascinating conversations. I still have his name. We hope to still meet up again sometime when he comes back through. He's from another state. So begin to pray for people. Pray for ways to extend your table. Use your home. Sometimes, we can understand using our home for maybe our own kind, right? Our own church group, our own relatives, but bringing people into our home from the outside or from those who aren't our kind can really feel vulnerable or scary, or is it wise or whatever. But let's use our home. I believe that's just part of the vulnerability of being Christ followers. And using our home, they can see who you are. They get to see the books you read, the stuff you have on your wall, how you relate to those in your home, your parents or your wife or your siblings, your children. They get to see, all of a sudden, things they have never seen before, they get to see. And I just think that's so important, living in front of people, kind of the glass house idea, where they can watch you. Because people nowadays, they're not interested in some nice words, with a track and on the street for 5 minutes. They want to have a relationship. And it's only through that relationship we begin to trust you. Remember, they're very skeptical, our people in the West especially, very skeptical. Okay, so moving along here. Use your kitchen table as a place for a Bible study. Recently, we've been doing that at our house. There's something unique about that table. Like typically, our Bible studies happen in our living room. But putting it right out on our table, there's something neat there. There's an expectancy there that is neat. Do it with your church. Do it together. If maybe you aren't able to do all the things of hospitality might call you to. Work with others. Find others who have the same vision. In our church, some of the ones from our church do a free lunch on campus every Wednesday for international students. They have like 150 students coming every Wednesday. So the young people are helping. They've asked restaurants to donate food. So it's not like it's cost a whole lot, but it's making these incredible relationships where they sit down and talk with people over this free meal. It's a neat opportunity. And my final point is this. This might sound kind of funny to you. Consider a business as mission cafe. Surprise, surprise. Why would I be? But consider that. What if every Anabaptist community would have a cafe or a coffee shop or a restaurant where people that want to get to know you know they could access you there? Making yourself accessible to people, I think, is so important. And many of our businesses do that. But I think we should strategize a little bit. What business would enable me to make myself accessible to a large demographic of people? Maybe not to just one economic demographic, but a wide demographic, and also a broad ethnic demographic. What might be that business? And I want to suggest that a cafe is an incredible opportunity where they got to come every day or so and get that coffee or eat that special cuisine that you're making up. I believe it exponentially increases your capacity to harness the relational power at the intersection of hospitality and community. So it's the idea of just extending your kitchen table. It doesn't need to be big, but it really exponentially increases those opportunities of finding those people who are seeking and who want to have a Bible study, who want to learn more about Jesus and his kingdom. And for us, we just consider our cafe as kind of step one in many processes to seeing them actually come into the kingdom. Maybe our house might be step two, inviting them into our home or to a church picnic, friendship picnic or whatever. So there's many steps in the process of taking somebody who's deeply skeptical to where they're ready to find Christ. There's a huge continuum there, and it takes time. Lonnie Collins said this: "The table is a place where you connect and belong. It is a place where the past remains alive in the memory of the older, and the future sparkles with possibility. It is enchanted. We lean close together. We share a glass. We tell a story. Through this simple human relating, the universe feels as though it's right again." She wrote that in Radical Hospitality, a book that I would recommend to you. Okay, we better keep moving along here. We're at 5 after 11. All right, so our next our next E phrase is exercise unreasonable hospitality. And I have a little story that I want to tell you here. In 2018, another brother and I went to northern Iraq to visit the Bible translation need that was there among the folks there. And while we were there, one Saturday morning, we decided to hike way up in the mountains. There was some large mountains behind that town, and one of the older men there did it every Saturday, and he invited me along. I was like, sure, let's go. That'd be great. And so I need to work on my physique anyhow. So we headed out early in the morning. I mean, it was even, the sun, I think it was just slightly, the west was just the east was lightly colored. And we headed up into the mountains. And we get way back in there. And we come to the end of this one ridge. And this older gentleman says, he said, if you look way over there, and there was this huge ravine or valley and back up, way over there on the side of the mountain, there is an ancient village that no longer existed. It got destroyed. But there's a spring that bubbles on the side of the mountain, and we'll replenish our water canteens and come back. And I'm standing there looking, and I said, hey, brother, there's some people moving around right close to the spring. And he goes, no, I mean, only people back in here are like maybe a shepherd or two or something like that. And I said, no, it's actually a number of people. I'm looking, and he's an older gentleman, actually in his 70s, and he's not able to see those people. And then as I'm looking, I'm remembering that the day before, one of the leaders of this base told me, he said, every Saturday this older gentleman goes back there, hikes way back in there. And we always we kind of pray that he comes back safely, because he said back in those mountains, there's sometimes Iranian militias and other militias with not the best plans for those around them back in there. And all of a sudden, as I'm looking at those people, I'm remembering that conversation. And I start going, oh no. And this guy went on to say, he said, well, we'll call this guy Bob, this older gentleman. He said he's got a big white beard. He's older, 70s. But we always figured that, hey, with the Muslim respect for age, they probably wouldn't take someone like that anyhow hostage. But at that point, I didn't have much gray, and I was about 5 years younger, and I thought, great, this might get interesting. But before I knew it, Bob's headed down the mountain, and I'm after him. We come down, climb back up the side to this little trail that goes around to this village, and Bob's leading the way, and I'm behind him. And by that point, every fiber in my body is just zinging. I'm really tuned in what we're gonna find as we pop around the corner of that mountain. And we came around the corner, and there on this ledge is a bunch of those men. The men are still there. They're doing something. I wasn't quite sure what they were doing. Propped over here against the wall was a gun or two. And guns, in this part of the world, not good. And I come back to the men. About that time, there's a gentleman headed my way. And to my gratefulness, he has his hands like this, and he's got a smile on his face. And he's speaking English. He's a man from the larger people group there in that area. But he knew English. He was like, welcome, welcome, welcome. And he brought us over there, and all the other men jumped up and kind of stood back. They weren't able to speak English, but he was, and they all kind of stood back there. And they had this picnic cloth spread out on the ground. And on that cloth was dates and nuts and goat cheese, and they had little cups for chai. I mean, it was some amazing, amazing Middle Eastern cuisine. And they were like, sit down, sit down. So we sat down there, and they went over to where they had a little fire going in the rocks, and they put a couple more pieces of wood on it, and put the little teapot back on there with more water. And pretty soon we were having more tea. And all these guys are standing around just, watching and helping us. And we, on the side of that mountain in northern Iraq, had the most epic picnic I've ever had. I mean, not only were the servers going over the top, the scenery was incredible. We were in this ancient old village. It was some olive trees and these ancient old walls, and the mountains kind of rose all around you. And you could look out with one way and look out across the Nineveh plains. This is kind of the heart of civilization. And we're being just served this amazing meal with amazing hospitality. And that day, it really hit me how I was a minority. I was the dangerous outsider. And here I was able to experience this most incredible, unreasonable hospitality. And I never forget that show of just, we're here to serve you. Never forget that. I think back to that often. Because here in the United States, here in Pennsylvania, I'm the majority person. I know English, I'm white, I'm all these things that speak of privilege. I was not that there. What does hospitality mean anyhow? What does that word mean to you as you think of hospitality? Unfortunately, it's been a word that's been just really, really ruined here in the West. I mean, there's the hospitality industry, right? Where there's like motels and restaurants and kind of all this place where it's like, you pay me, and we'll put you up for the night. And where the service is very subpar and the ethos around that is often lacking a lot. It's kind of a desert compared to maybe the hospitality of old, or the hospitality that I experienced there. I want to just kind of take you a little bit deeper into the word hospitality. So the Greek word for hospitality is philia xenoth. And philia xenoth is the opposite of another word that you probably have heard. You probably never heard the word philia xenoth unless you're like a Greek scholar. Any Greek scholars here? Okay, then I'm good, because I'm sure I'm ruining the Greek too, because I'm not a Greek scholar. Okay, so philia xenoth is the biblical Greek word for hospitality. But there is a more pop culture Greek word that's the totally opposite of that you might know. Does anybody know what that word is? Okay. Has anybody ever heard xenophobia? Raise your hand. You've heard that word before. It's kind of a pop culture word, kind of gets thrown around the political world of, the right-wing folks. There's xenophobia because they didn't want people coming in across the borders and, all that world that I have no interest in taking part of. But that word gets thrown around. He's xenophobic, or they're full of xenophobia. We know what phobia means, right? Phobia means a fear of. Like, I have a phobia of mice. Like, my wife is the one who kills the mice in our house. And I remember her like climbing up on the highest thing I can get up on. And it's a great joke. It get turned into a joke way too much to make me happy, but that's the case. My children, they're after it. Linnell's after it. I'm like, where can I find the highest place out here? So I have a phobia of mice. And xenophobia is this idea of stranger fear, right? Fearing the stranger. And that's at the heart of like every people group around the world that you go into. That's just a reality. Even back in biblical times, a stranger in a village, people looked at him like, who is this guy? Like, the tendency was to look at them with a lot of skepticism. And so it's really, I think, is innate to the fall, to our flesh, as we look at with skepticism at those on the outside. We don't naturally have philia xenoth. So how many people know the word philia? Or think of Philadelphia, right? Philia, brotherly love. That's what that means. There's like 5 different words in Greek with all different meanings, but philia means that the idea of like a brother, to love, that familial love. And so philia xenoth, which is the word for hospitality, means to love strangers as a brother. Isn't that amazing? To love them as a brother, even in the face of, it can mean, even in the face of harm. So it's like this very vulnerable step forward saying, I don't know who you are, but I'm going to be kind to you. I'm going to treat you like family. And that's exactly what I experienced there on the mountain of northern Iraq that day, was this incredible stranger love or stranger kindness that came to me. All right? So let's think about the storyline of Scripture a little bit. Obviously, we have hospitality used somewhat in the New Testament, but is it really the story of God? And I like to say yes, absolutely. Let's look at the first book of the Bible. Just look at Genesis for a little bit, and then we'll move on to make some application to this idea of exercise unreasonable hospitality. Just think of the book of Genesis. Who stands out to you as you think about Genesis? Who stands out to you as someone who exercised unreasonable hospitality, or somebody who exercised this philia xenoth? Somebody. Yes?
Good. Not.
Okay. Joseph did, yeah. That's good. What was the word?
Abraham.
name. Thank you. Abraham, yes. So Joseph, that was good. But Abraham is who we're thinking about. We think of him, those three men, right, which actually were angels coming to him. And it has amazing words about how he responded there, how he responded to those men. He ran to meet them. He bowed to the ground. He said, Sarah, quick, make a meal. He went out to the herd and got the choice calf, and he served them. He just waited on them. I know what I experienced on that mountain is what these men experienced from Abraham. Also Lot, too. Almost the same exact thing kind of played out there when those men showed up there in Sodom. Lot showed incredible hospitality. But I want to take you back a little bit further in Genesis to the beginning of the story. And here we see God showing this incredible hospitality. I believe that God is the ultimate host. He created, in the Garden of Eden, he created this lavish heaven on earth in the garden. And he introduced into them these humans to live there. And even more than that, God came and walked with them, right? He came and walked with them. He talked with them. Did he dine with them? Why wouldn't he? We see Jesus in his resurrected body dining there with the disciples. We see that numerous times with the disciples dining with them. So I don't know. It doesn't really say that, but it's fun to kind of think about that. But yeah, God, I believe God is the ultimate host. And then we could look up through the Old Testament and just see over and over again. As a physical nation, they were to welcome the stranger in the land. Deuteronomy 10 says this, you should love the stranger because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So it's not so much about do to others as you want them to do to you. He's saying to them, do to others because of what has been done to you. And I believe when we begin to understand that as humans, as what Jesus has done for us, or even God as that ultimate host, it's not so much, we can kind of draw on that Sermon on the Mount idea of the golden rule or doing to others what you want them done to you, but I think it's also so much has been done to us, and so we do the same to others. Actually, we're called to do that. So moving into the New Testament, we see God captures the heart for the stranger in many areas of life, in teaching, serving, dining, really about all his life. We can look at Luke 4 there, where he talks about the idea of the new humanity. And he reads out of Isaiah 61, talking about preaching the good news to the poor, proclaiming freedom to captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to see the oppressed go free. It's this incredible mission statement at the beginning of Jesus' ministry as he gets up and he gets the Isaiah scroll and he reads there to those people. It's just like Jesus saying, that's why I'm here. And we know that it was much more than just decrees from some high up God. Jesus was listening to his Father in heaven, but he came and incarnated himself and lived among the people. And like someone said, he did it was like a 3-year camping trip, across Israel, where he was hanging out with his disciples. Can you imagine all the campfire stories, all the meals that Jesus made, all the connections, conversations with not only the disciples, but others? He was among them. He was a host in so many ways. So we're thinking about this idea of exercise unreasonable hospitality. I'd like to get into some of the kind of practical points, or what I call action points here. But before I do that, I do want us to think a little bit about the early church. So, we can look at the storyline of Scripture, we can see hospitality, love of the stranger taught the whole way through it, right through the epistles. Many teaching, we don't have time for that. But many historians anymore unanimously agree that the way the early church advanced the kingdom was not through some kind of powerful preaching on a stage or on a stump in the corner of the street, but it was actually through this idea, this sacrament, this service of philia, of loving the strangers around you as yourself and your family. And there's many stories of how the early church became known in cities very quickly as those who took care of the stranger. They became known as the ones who went right to the center, to the intellectuals, to the wealthy, and converted them, engaged with the ideas at the center, and then said, okay, wealthy business owner now that's served the poor. Oftentimes that's how it happened. It's kind of this Acts 17 reality there where you have Paul engaging with the pagans there in the Galapagos. And it's the same thing they did. So, but beyond that beyond even just serving strangers, they also exercise hospitality among themselves. And I think within our Anabaptist churches in general, we've done well with this, but I think we're really struggling with this. So when you travel to through an area and you need to get a motel, do you check to see, hey, is there any other Anabaptist churches in the area? Like, is any of my friends around here? Like, I met that guy back there at Focus 2 years ago. I'm gonna call him up and see if he can come spend the night at his house. Some of us would do that, but more and more it's like hop on your app and do an Airbnb and catch a whatever for the night. But the early church, I mean, there wasn't those types of things in that time, but the early church, they really exercised that among themselves. And there was actually and the Christians traveled. Some scholars have called it the Holy Web. Okay, that's how they moved letters. They didn't have the email and internet and WhatsApp and all those things. They traveled. They carried the letter from their church, carried it to the other country, to the other church, and they spent time there among them and lived with them. And that was how these incredible relationships, that was how they provoked each other to love and good works across countries in a time where the pagans were like about just me or not about others or other peoples, especially other ethnicities and other nations. And so they showed this incredible polemic to the world of a kingdom that spans nations, of a people that is of every tongue, tribe, and nation. Together, we're together, and then we're also here to serve together. So it was this amazing picture. Okay, so let's talk about as we think about how to exercise hospitality, let's look at some action points or some practical activities. And I'm going to just lay out here what I call the Emmaus Road hospitality map. It's really simple. It's 3 words: walk, talk, and dine. I don't think I need to recount the Emmaus Road story to you or go take you there and read it in Luke 24. But when you get a chance, do that. Go there and look at that. And in laying this out, I'm doing it in this sequence for a reason. Walk together, and then and while you're walking, you can talk together. And there's something in that time of walking and talking that you get to know somebody, and maybe the strangeness of the other person goes away. There's a relationship that is built. And we see that happening right there on the Emmaus Road. Jesus kind of came out of the blue, no pun intended, all right, and walked with the disciples. Maybe some people think it was a husband and wife, and they were like, man, it's really too bad what happened. Jesus got killed. Everyone has their head hanging, and they're heading back home. And Jesus comes and walks alongside of them, and he walks with them, right? And in that walking, in that mundane, just walking from one place to the next, there's a relationship that is created. There's an opportunity that springs forth. That's the way we go around here. We walk, and that's the way. It wasn't like Jesus showed up in the temple, just with these 2 insignificant people walking with them. And so I think the idea of walking is think about ways, how can you walk with people in your community? How can you do that? What does walking look like with people in your community? It could mean working with them. It could mean going to the park. It could mean it's just the natural, the mundane rhythms of life are the place to look for those opportunities to create that connection, to create that relationship, to identify with them as like, I'm human just like you. Look for ways to not only physically walk with people, but also spiritually walk with them. And it might not seem so spiritual at first. It could be just a very insignificant or mundane way. And then the second thing we have is talk. Okay, so Jesus talked with them, all right, as they walked. Can somebody say what he did first? What kind of a statement did Jesus make first as he got alongside them and walked with them? Can somebody tell me? It was like, hey, I'm Jesus. I'm back from the dead.
Did he ask why they were sad?
Why they were sad. So what did he ask? A question. He asked them a question, and even a pretty personal question, right? When was the last time you walked in the street and you saw someone say, hey, why are you sad? Do you think people would like that? We'll get to that here shortly. He's like, why are you guys sad? And then what did he say next? It's actually a question, I'm pretty sure. It borders on a question. He's like, tell me more. They kind of repeated what happened a little bit. He's like, tell me more, right? So he's like probing, having these questions. He's not showing up as Jesus, as God, like, straightening them up, painting the whole picture to them, giving them a book. No, he's showing us as a human, walking with them, asking them questions and talking, and then of course he goes into this incredible, I look forward to when we're in the new heaven, new earth, where we can walk with Jesus and hear him talk about the scriptures. So we took the Old Testament and just showed to them who this Messiah was going to be, and still they didn't know who it was until they sat down and they dined together. So talking together, all right? He was asking questions. As we talk, someone said, conversation is food for the soul. People want to talk, and these guys were sad, they were discouraged. Jesus comes alongside, asking questions and talking with them. So there's been different people in my life who as I think about this idea of talking, there's a gentleman, we're going to call him Steve. He's someone I got to know through Sower. He's an atheist. In the last 5 or 6 years, he's been coming to the cafe. And Steve was what Tim Keller is the epitome of a Western American. What Tim Keller was pointing out was a skeptical person who was becoming very hardened towards Christianity. He had got turned off at conservative Christianity, which was very much of a right-wing, warmongering, kind of in-your-face American spirit. He got totally turned off that in his years growing up, had walked away from Christianity, became an atheist, a self-proclaimed atheist, and was heading even into the depth of atheism, which is very angry atheism. And today he's not a Christian, Steve isn't, but he's somebody who, because of the team of people that are sowers, he's recently told me that his heart is again soft towards Christianity. And by the way, one of the most scandalous things to him was when I told him that I never put a vote in my life. Like I never voted. And to him that was just scandalous. Like, what? You're this passionate Christian, conservative Christian, and you've never voted? And we've had some amazing conversation around how that's not the way God changes the world. And I helped him to see that Christianity in the West has lost its imagination. Like, that's terrible. The only way we can imagine change the world is through politics. And it's so far removed from the way of Jesus, which is to serve up and invite people into a relationship and a way of life, an alternative society, if you will. And so we meet up pretty much monthly, have coffee together and tea, but we talk about a lot of mundane things, and it's not every time we get into a spiritual conversation. But I come into those times of talking with him, like Lord, saying, Lord, give me wisdom, because he's a lot smarter than me. I'm not an apologist. I am not. N.T. Wright has this great quote. This quote gives me comfort many times. N.T. Wright says this, he said, our primary task is not so much to give answers to impossible philosophical questions as to bring signs of God's new world to birth. Okay, so I'm going to have a hard time going up against him intellectually and convincing him of a God. I'm going to have a hard time doing that. It can be hard to point to maybe objective evidence of a God, but I do believe that I can show it to him in many other ways that will speak to his heart in ways that will go right on his mind. And we're seeing that happening. So talking with people. All right, the last one here in this little sequence, of this Emmaus roadmap. And finally, it's dine, all right? We got to dine with people. When was the last time that you ate with a stranger? When was the last time that you met somebody, got to know them, and is like, boy, I'm going to step out here, and I'm going to say, hey, can we have coffee together? When was the last time you did that? When was the last time? When was the last time some people that you didn't really know very well said, we want you to come eat with us? What happened there on the Emmaus Road? Did Jesus kind of invite himself in to sit with them? No, he was going to continue on. They were cutting off, all right? They were getting off the ramp for supper. And he's like, I'm going to keep on going. And they were like, whoa, where are you going? Come with us. Come sit with us. We've been having a great time. You've been revealing all this amazing stuff to us. Come with us. And Jesus is like, oh, okay, whatever you say. And he goes in and he sits down with them. He dines with them. Well, I don't know if that ever happened to me. But I know some people in my life who that has happened to, because they're just so full of Christ. Like even people who are sinners are like, I like that guy. I want to know him better. And so they find ways like, come, let's hang out with me. Let's do this together. I want to learn to know you better. All right, so dining with people is so important. Somebody has says that Jesus ate his way through the Gospels. Okay, he ate with people. He even ate with sinners. Rosaria Butterfield in the book, The Gospel Comes with a House Key. If you haven't read that book, highly recommend it. The Gospel Comes with a House Key. She was a lesbian. She was somebody who was not just part of the LGBTQ movement, but at the head of it in the 80s and 90s on her campus. I'm not sure where that was. And so she was the one who was being really aggressive with that agenda. And obviously Christianity is very much opposed to that agenda. And so she hated Christians for the most part. And she got lots of angry letters from Christians, damning her to hell and stuff like that, and which didn't really help her a whole lot in her love for Christians or her thoughts for Christians. And then one day she gets a letter from a pastor saying, Rosaria, we read your letters in the paper. We'd love to have you over for lunch sometime. Would you consider doing that to our place for lunch? And she was somebody who prided herself in being open-minded and willing to dialogue with others of different opinions and mindsets. And so she accepts the invitation, goes and sits down with them for a meal. And they had this amazing relational meal together. And when she left, she's like, wow, I kind of like that. And it wasn't like they didn't even have an agenda. They just connected as humans in life. And when she left, they said, hey, we'd love to have you back again sometime. And she was like, I would love to come back sometime. And so it then began a sequence of meetings up with this pastor and his wife for meals. And through that time, she went through a really deep valley in her life, and they were there for her, supporting her, praying with her. And through that, she became a Christian. And so today, she's this passionate believer who has written this book, The Gospel Comes with a House Key. She actually wrote a book before it too called The Unlikely Thoughts, The Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert. Again, a really neat book to read as you kind of see into somebody who is, who their idea of human flourishing is totally opposite of Christianity's. And as she kind of processes that and goes through that journey from being, adamantly against Christianity to actually accepting it. So, hardly anything is more characteristic of Christian love than hospitality. Through the ministry of this philia xenoth, of love of stranger as a brother, we share the things that we value the most. Our family, our home, our financial resources, our food, our privacy, and our time. Rosaria Butterfield says this. She says, hospitality is not PhD Christianity. It's ABC Christianity. So as you go back to wherever God is calling you, please consider, how can I do this second point, and that is exercise unreasonable hospitality in my life, your salvation depends on it, and of course, many others in your world, in your community. So finally, the third one here, and our last one of the E's, is this: engage in dignifying conversation. Engage in dignifying conversation. Is there lots of conversations that are not dignifying in our world? Have you ever been part of a conversation that was not dignifying? I'm sad to say that I have been, even at times with those who weren't believers. I have a quick story to tell you. We're probably about 5.5 weeks maybe from the whole Israeli-Hamas thing that started on a Saturday morning, on Shabbat morning, Sabbath morning in Israel, when Hamas broke through the fence, when Hamas came in with gliders into Israel. I think it was 1,000 Hamas fighters? They started shooting a barrage of rockets. This is Saturday morning, Israel is quiet. It's actually the holidays. It was the Feast of Tabernacles. So there was a whole week there of celebration and vacationing and stuff like that as a devout, especially of Israel, it remembered how God took them through the wilderness. So it's Saturday morning of this week of celebration. It's dead quiet in Israel. And these fighters break through the line at sunrise, 6:30 on Saturday morning. And as we know, there was death everywhere. Okay, so Hamas came to kill. And Israelis responded with the same kind, all right? Because they saw that we have to respond with the same kind. And so there was death. Wherever Hamas and Israelis met up, there was death. There was 1,400 people killed, plus Hamas folks. But there was one account that I read on the news, and it was an account of Rachel, who's an Israeli, that she was caught by surprise. And so she moved into a creative way of relating to them. Rachel is known in her little town as a woman of hospitality. When you come to meet Rachel, she would serve you some of her tea and her renowned Moroccan cookies, okay? She was known for hospitality. And when those men surprised her in her living room and there was nothing she could do, she got creative. And she began to steward her hospitality that she had honed so well in her community, was known for it. So out came the tea, out came the Moroccan cookies, and they ended up having a 20-hour tea party in her living room. Now, it wasn't always a party, but these Hamas guys were being pretty aggressive, even hit her a time or two. But she was able to relate to them in a way through conversation and human interaction that she appealed to their deepest sense. She served them her Moroccan cookies, her tea, even pineapple. She sang to them in Arabic songs, okay, which is the language of the Arabs, not her first language, most likely not, because she's Jewish. And they sang back to her Jewish songs or Hebrew songs. So they ended up having this neat time of hey, we're humans here together, right? So after they began to eat and drink, they became much, much calmer. One Hamas guy said, "You remind me of my mom." And she said, "I'm really like your mom. How can I help you? What can I do for you?" Reflecting on this experience later, Rachel said this: "I started having conversations, and at one point, I even forgot that they were terrorists, that they were Hamas guys." Now, unfortunately, that story didn't end so well. Rachel was not killed, but the Hamas guys were, because there was a surprise attack. Somehow they figured out what was going on. Her son was a police officer, and they did a surprise attack and they killed the Hamas guys. A sad ending. But still an incredible lesson, I think, of this idea of engaging with dignifying conversations. Isn't that who God is? When I met that man there on the sidewalk that I had prayed earlier that morning for a chance to share the hope that is within me with meekness and fear. I ended up talking about how God is a relational God, that he wants to connect with us and he wants to talk with us and he wants us to talk to him, that God is this relational God. God loves these dignifying conversations, and we see that in Christ, his most intimate revelation. And Jesus said in John 15, no longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all the things that I've heard from my Father, I have made known to you. So it's this idea of friendship, of relationship. So I want to quickly move into, here as we wrap up, 4 killers of humanizing conversations, and then 4 builders of humanizing conversations. So number 1 is, we know when we're doing it, but I feel like it has to be said. So number 1 is fear, being fearful. How many of you struggle with fear? Like, I'll raise my hand high so everybody. People say that I love talking with people, but I find it hard to talk with strangers at times, to find ways to interact. And so I get fearful. I even sometimes when I'm sitting down with my friend Steve, the atheist, I'm fearful inside, like, I just don't have what it takes in here to engage at his level, and I'm fearful. And just this past time that happened, I was fearful. And he was really going on this polemic against Christianity and why it's wrong and why would God relate that way, and he doesn't understand it. And it's like, I'm thinking inside, I just don't know how to respond to this. Like, I just don't have, I think it could be responded to, but I just don't have it in my head to really engage kind of at the level that he has with Christianity. But as I sat back, I was praying, Lord, help me here. And it was so fun. He started answering his own questions as he's thought through. He's like, well, he began to answer his own questions. I'm like, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And so I realized later, like, why should I fear? Like, you can walk into these conversations. You don't have to have all the answers. Just be praying. Okay, fear. God hasn't given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Okay, so that's number 1 killer. 2, articulation overload. Are you a person who has high articulation needs? Okay, it's just fancy word for saying talking too much. All right, do you talk too much? All right, that's a killer for humanizing conversations. 3rd is assumptions, or you could call it mind reading. Okay, you imagine the person is thinking this. You imagine the person is dressed this way because they want to be like this, and because of that they hate me. So quickly we can have all these crazy assumptions that are so far from the truth. Mind reading is a killer to humanizing conversations. I mean, well, we'll keep on moving here. Number 4 is being easily offended or angered. So as you relate to strangers, as I relate to my friend Steve, he will say things at times that anger me. I mean, I know he's not like inside. By God's grace, I've always responded, I believe, with meekness. But that you can easily get angered. And when you become angry, the conversation's over. Okay? Steve hates the people on the street who are holding the signs, okay, and preaching an angry message. Like, he's seen so much of that, and it just turns him off. Anger. That's the great way to end a great killer. So finally now, let's look at 4 ways to build up good conversations. 4 ways. And I'm taking these actually from a book that I'm just reading right now. It's a book by, I'm forgetting her name. It's called The 6 Conversations. She is from Penn State. She's a Penn State professor, a Christian. I've never met her. Within the last 3 weeks, I had her brother email me, and he said, hey, my wife is reading this book. Here, she's a Penn State professor. She thinks conversations are important. I'm sure you know her, don't you? I was like, no, never heard her name. Didn't know her. And so I got her book, and I ended up within like a week or two buying like 30 books and giving them out to our staff at Sowers. It's a great book. If you like reading, I mean, it's like a 150-page book, a pretty quick read, but she is passionate to see people engaging in conversations. And it's titled The 6 Conversations. You can ask me later afterwards. I'll have that title for you. Actually, I have the book in my backpack. So, and she lays out kind of towards the beginning of this book 4 ways to have these dignifying conversations. The first one is you got to be curious. You have to be curious. Who is this person? What has made them who they are? What are their challenges? What are their struggles? And I believe that as we allow Christ to fill us, as we allow this idea of bringing heaven to earth to infuse us, to inflame our imagination, that we should be people, we will be people who can learn how to connect with others, and of course, with prayer and the Holy Spirit. You'll find yourself asking questions you might have never thought you would ask. And actually, she lays out in the book later this idea of being curious and asking questions. She says they've found, and she's quoting tons of research and psychology and all these things, but they've found actually an easy way to begin a conversation with somebody is by asking a question with a number in it. Like, how many weeks were you at Focus? Or how old are you? How many years did you live in that part, in that state? When you begin to ask questions on numbers, people will actually jump into it, and it actually helps get the conversation going easier. It's just kind of like this psyche thing. Okay, I never knew that one before. I haven't tried it yet, so you can try it with me. All right, so be curious. So the second thing under this builders for good conversation is believe the best in others. So it's the opposite of assumptions, right? Which can sometimes be negative. We tend to, by our default human way, we tend to kind of operate from the mode of like guilty to proved innocent. Have you ever been around somebody like that in your life? Maybe you struggle with that, guilty to proved innocent. And some people maybe tend to be more analytical, more observant, more cautious, more negative, okay? If you're that person, you might struggle more with this. But the idea of believe the best in people, give them the benefit of the doubt. We use it all the time at our house. Please, give that person the benefit of the doubt. You have to. Otherwise, it just becomes death in our family, in our world. But when we believe others, believe the best in others, we bring heaven to earth. Number 3, in the sequence of building good conversations, you need to share concerns or express concern. Like, wow, I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm sorry, how can I help? What if you would do this? And a person who truly cares about somebody, who shows concern for people, will follow up later. How has it been for you? And we'll follow through it. Showing concern is a way to have those humanizing conversations or dignifying. And then finally, the 4th one here, and we're about ready to wrap up, is this idea of share your life. Share your life. And I find this one hard to share my life, especially with somebody who's not a believer or a challenge in your life. But as you share your life, that person opens up too. And we recently had this deal where we moved to another property, and we lived in the city all our lives, or in pretty dense urban areas, and we've always had good neighbors. This is the 3rd time we moved, and we landed in a spot, and we have some neighbors who don't like us very well. It could be because I have 7 children who love making noise, along with a church with like this year we had 7 babies born into our church. So there's tons of children. Children outnumber adults by far. And so when we have pretty quickly we have 14 children tearing around our little yard, and a couple of the neighbors just don't like chaos very much, and we pretty soon got on their bad side. So we had some work to do, and we're still working to resolve some of those things. Thankfully, there's one gentleman who we've finally got through to, and he's now a friend of ours, but the other one, we have a little ways to go yet. But yeah, I shared that with my friend Darren, and it was fun. He was soon texting me ideas of how I could become their friends, and Some of the things he was suggesting I probably wouldn't do as a Christ follower, but I listened, and anyhow, it was fun. So share your life with those around you, okay? So the builder's idea is be curious, believe the best, express concern, share your life. All right, we're moving towards wrap up here. And she quotes, the writer of the 6 Conversations quotes Margaret Wheatley in her book, who says this: human conversation is the most ancient and easiest way to cultivate conditions for change. Personal change, community and organizational change, systemic change, planetary or world change. If we sit together and talk about what's important to us, we begin to come alive. So in wrap up here, we've talked about the 3 E phrases of how we can provide a table in the wilderness, how we can become those hands that reach out, okay, to serve. So those 3 things would extend your table, exercise unreasonable hospitality, engage in dignifying conversations. And remember, all these things are way more than just to see people moved from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of light. All these things are to see communities, right, of believers, diverse communities who are teaching, who are living out the word of God in front of them. We think of that beautiful picture there in Revelation 5 and also 7 of these many tongues, tribes, nations there before the throne of worshiping God. We want to see that happen now and for sure in the future and be part of that. Stanley Hauerwas says this. He says, the most creative strategy we have to offer is the church. Here we show the world a manner of life the world could never achieve through social coercion, quote politics, or governmental action. We serve the world by showing it something that it is not, namely a place where God is forming a family out of strangers. Or maybe more succinctly put by John D. Martin, he says this: Jesus wants a society of redeemed people to show the world what the whole world would look like if everyone obeyed the King. So God bless you as you consider about how can you, along with others around you, provide these tables in the wilderness, this place of invitation where people can come, be among you, and be changed by God's blessing, by Him working in us and through us, can be changed and become part of God's family. God bless you richly.